arms all over. Welcome to the latest episode of Don't Work with Tossers, the podcast that will help you rid tossers from your work and personal life. Today I am very pleased to welcome Anj Handa, founder of Inspiring Women Changemakers.
Thank you, Tina. Thanks for inviting me on today.
It's an absolute pleasure. So when I announced that I was going to launch a podcast called Don't Work with Tossers, I had a number of people come forward that suggested a title that they wanted to talk about, and Anj came forward and said, could she talk about tossers that discriminate? So here we are with this episode, Tossers That Discriminate, and Anj has some life experience to share with us. But first, Anj, tell us about how long have you been self-employed and what did you do before you ran your own business?
I've been self-employed for 12 years, which I can hardly believe. It's coming on for 13. And before that, I was the director of a non-departmental public body. So it was part of the National Employment Panel.
And I suppose my question would be, and you might not be able to answer this because, of course, we have to beware of legal implications. But which do you find to have more tossers in, the former life or the self-employed life, or is it just equal?
Tossers are present in every single aspect of working life. It's up to you to decide which ones are and whether you're going to work with them. So I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in the quasi kind of public sector and in the charitable sector, and with public agencies and others. And I can honestly say tossers exist everywhere.
And in life, personal life.
And in life as well,
I mean, we do also we can have tossers in our own families, but we can't necessarily rid ourselves of those, can we, in the same way as we would. I think it's important that we actually come to understand that we can stop working with tossers, though, and that it's around the values that we have. And I've talked about the traits of tossers because your type of tosser and my type of tosser might be very different. But for you, what are some key traits that you find run through the different people that you feel are tossers?
The part is about not just values, but also about feeling valued and whether someone is trying to put you in a box when you don't belong in a box. So those are some things. Feeling undervalued in terms of, as a freelancer, in terms of what conditions you're offered or what you're expected to do. And I also think it's also about fair terms. So I probably will talk about fairness quite a bit, because even when I was a child, I had this very strong sense of justice and fairness. That my constant refrain was, that's not fair. And that is something that has threaded through life. And I think my early journey in sales was more equalising than my later journey, actually, because if you're a good salesperson, you're a good salesperson, and that's what your employer cares about. So the fairness was generally there in that sense, and running your own business, it starts to creep in, and particularly for me working in the governance and diversity space, it's very easy for people to want to box me in a certain way because of the colour of my skin, for example, whereas my experience and the depth of practice that I've had is much bigger than that.
Yeah. And I think I know you said you were out having a drink earlier with somebody and you were talking about tossers and somebody asked you if they were all men, and you are quite clear on that, and I quite agree with you. They are not all men, aren't tossers. They come in all genders.
They come in all genders, all ages, stages, shapes and sizes, and it's up to you to discern for yourself, because I think, as you said, Tina, what doesn't sit well with me might be okay for you. and might not be okay for somebody else. And I think we just have to get clear and set those boundaries. So for me, doing that work on my own boundary and where someone is overstepping the mark, and trusting my intuition as well, it's a lot easier the older you become, the longer you've been self-employed. I think setting those boundaries and not having someone overstep the mark and not giving too many chances is definitely a thing.
And I think also not being afraid to walk away from, and I know you and I have talked about this quite a lot on LinkedIn and social media. We've talked about the setting those boundaries, because for me, I've got that criteria that I know you're aware of and I've talked about before. If it doesn't bring me income, if it doesn't bring me happiness, if it doesn't bring me promotion to bring me income or happiness, I won't do it. I won't work with organisations that take all my knowledge and expertise and use it as their own without crediting me written or financial. I won't work with organisations that don't have the end user at heart. And I won't work with tossers. And that, when I first wrote those guidelines, really for myself, but then shared it in a post on LinkedIn, that the criteria 6, the don't work with tossers, was criteria 6. Now that's criteria 1 for me.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about boundaries, it's actually important for us to have our own criteria of the work that we will do and the type of work we will take on. And I think it's very easy. I was talking to somebody the other day who's just started out in business, and she said, "Oh, but I'll take anything at the moment because I can't afford not to." And I said, no, you can't afford to just take anything, because that then becomes you do end up with the tossers, in my experience.
I would agree with that, and I think what I was about to say was, I think turning down work and keeping those boundaries does come with a certain level of privilege that maybe we have because of track record and reputation, which isn't always financial privilege, by the way. So, you know, I'm a single woman. I've been self-employed for 12 years, like anybody else, and particularly with COVID, there were those peaks and troughs. But actually what I found is, when I have been strong with those boundaries, that inner confidence that it has given me when I've said no has given me the motivation and drive to find the right kind of clients. And actually the financials have in turn been much, much better, and the conditions. And I think when you're enthused, when you're energized, when you're motivated, you do a great job for that client anyway, and you get referred, you know, you get recommended. So it becomes a cycle, but it's overcoming that own internal dialogue, I believe, first of all, of saying, I can turn down this work because I will be provided for in some way, and just trusting that process.
And I think, I mean, you talked to me in the initial message that you sent about, can I talk about tossers that discriminate? We all go through all those. We all have the experience, whether we're a business owner, whatever our gender, you know, age, the type of business we're in. I mean, there's a big thing about lifestyle. The government talks about lifestyle businesses, but my business is a lifestyle. I do it for my lifestyle. Yeah. You know, I'm a work-life blend coach, and that's what I coach people in, to create something that suits their lifestyle. That's what the work-life blend is about. Yeah. And so we all experience that, but you, because of the colour of your skin, have also experienced other types of tossers, which have brought a completely different level of tosserism, is that a word?
It's detrimental to finance, and it's not just about race. I have Inspiring Women Changemakers is a membership community which is inclusive of all genders. We have many women who are disabled, who are neurodivergent, who have different sexual orientation, or maybe a non-binary, and so this happens to a lot of people, and it happens at different levels as well. So as a British Indian woman who was brought up here and had quite a comfortable upbringing, you can say, it's not that we were ultra wealthy, but comfortable upbringing and schooling and university, I know I haven't had the same level of discrimination or the same battles to face as somebody else, another brown woman that might come from another heritage. And Islamophobia is definitely a thing in recruitment. It's also a thing in self-employment as well with clients. So some of the things that I faced are definitely different to other black and brown women, for example, and are different still to a disabled woman. My housemate for 6 years was also self-employed. She was a Paralympian, turned TV presenter now, and we learnt so much from each other on that intersection of race and disability, being a woman in business and sticking up for ourselves when it came to financial negotiation, but also the devaluing of our skills, which were, you know, and it's not bragging, were quite significant. And because of whatever characteristic we held, they weren't being valued in the same way. So it creates also a sense of inner frustration when you see people progressing that you know are not necessarily the best person for the job, but also in different ways as well in terms of winning business or a hesitation in awarding business over and above someone else. And I do have a specific example of that that I can anonymise later on.
Yeah, and I think it's some of the problem that we've got is actually talking about this more openly so that we can help to eradicate, not necessarily naming names, because I do believe, and I have talked about this across the podcast, that it's important that we're kind, even if somebody is behaving like a tosser or as a tosser towards us, we can move on from them and move them out of our lives, but we can still do it in a kind and considerate type of way. You know, if just because they don't like me or you or whatever, that's fine. There's billions of other people in the world. Go and find somebody else to befriend, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy that I'm more Marmite than Magnolia, as the sign in my office says. And I mean, I have a poster at home as well that says Marmite dividing the nation since whatever date it was, and that's true, and that's fine. But I think one of the things that I've found, I've stepped away from Twitter completely. Sorry, it's not called Twitter anymore, is it? It's called X. I've stepped away from X. Now, for me, when I was campaigning around micro business, that was the biggest platform that I had the most followers on, like thousands of followers. But actually, one of the reasons that I've stepped away from it is because I cannot cope with the number of tossers that are now on that platform. And also as part of my work-life blend and looking at the different things that impact me, I don't need to be over there and doing that, and people being unkind. And I think the kindness is back to what you're saying about being fair. You know, kindness and being fair can very often go hand in hand.
I love a quote by Brené Brown, who you might have heard of. She's an academic who's written multiple books and has one of the most viewed TED Talks. And she has a quote which is, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." And I really live by that, because I think if somebody has done something, don't leave them in the dark. Yeah. If something is not acceptable to you, and you can say it in a respectful and professional way, but still maintain your dignity as well. And so I think that if someone's inadvertently done something that was unkind or discriminatory, for example, how are they ever going to learn if you don't speak up? But there are ways of speaking up and not shaming people either, which is another really big part of Brené Brown's work, that I think we can educate in a way that doesn't shame.
Yeah, and I think the educating is important. I mean, I think the educating around all sorts of aspects of this subject, tossers that discriminate, is important. I live in Scarborough. We have a community that is has a very, very, very diverse. We're a very undiverse community, and that brings about its own issues. It brings about its own issues around discrimination, as far as I'm concerned. And again, it's back to how you deal with it, how you educate people, how you make it clear that that's not acceptable, and this is an acceptable way of doing it. And for me, that's having an open mind, being able to discuss things, but as you say, in a very clear way.
Yeah, but I also think it's about broad networks. You know, you have exceptionally broad networks, and so do I, and we've known each other for a long time, and that is what breaks down barriers and reduces discrimination to me, because we learn that we have a lot more in common. We have maybe friends in common, we have approaches, values, whatever we want to say. We are human beings muddling through life, all of us, you know, whatever our status and whatever our background, we all have our life things in common. And so for me, you know, on the surface, you mentioned Scarborough is not diverse, but actually it is. It has a lot of migrant communities, and I think you know, how those communities have opportunities to come together, and how new communities merge in as well, and how they come to become part of a community. I mean, this is how it has always been, right? You know, my dad moved to England in 1951. He was 18, and that was the time of no dogs, no blacks, no English. But now there are what are called desirable communities, and so, you know, the Indian diaspora has more or less been accepted, and it's the new Indians that existing Indians look down on. Same with Polish groups, same with others, and so I think there also has to be this recognition that discrimination doesn't always come from other cultural or other groups. It can also be established between and within as well, because what it boils down to is about who holds the power. It's about power dynamics, and where you see tossers operating, it's because they're keen to wield their power in the wrong way. It's not inner power, it's external power.
Yeah, and that's so true. And when you think about, I'm sat here smiling because I'm thinking about some people who I'd really stick in the tosser category, and that external power that they're trying to wield. And for me, I mean, Naomi Timperley talked about being kind, and she wants to be kind, but not everybody will perceive her as being, you know, a nice person, or might class her as a tosser, and I feel the same. But I think it is that it's about that power thing, how you, because as you say, we're both well connected, we both have opportunities to say, oh, we can, you know, this is us, look at us, we have this big network, but we don't, because the thing is that we're very keen to bring other people into that network and bring them together, and make sure that they are welcomed, and that we care for them, and we look after them. But not everybody wants to work in that way.
No, and we have to recognise that as well. People have their own way. And I was talking, I had a conversation yesterday. I do training on good governance and train aspiring trustees, and we had this really interesting chat about compassion and empathy, and how it feels more easier to be compassionate or give a more measured or empathetic response when you're in a good place yourself as well. And we don't know what's going on in people's lives, if they react in a different way. So it's also, to me, about consistency. How are they showing up? How are they showing? You can build a picture. I think that is the thing about LinkedIn. You can see who's being generous and making introductions or making comments, and likewise you can see who's all me. And I think you know, for me, the people who I've ended up working with are those who have a really generous spirit.
Yeah, and I think, and then the other thing for me is when your generosity, you are having a generous spirit, you're sharing that generous spirit, and actually it's not constantly being taken advantage of, and people using that, which is one of my criteria. You know, I won't work with organisations that take all my knowledge and expertise and use it as their own. But I'm happy to give that expertise and knowledge, and not necessarily want to be paid for giving it either, but I just want somebody to credit me for it, not, because I'm in my 35th year of self-employment, so it's taken me a long time to get to where I am. People often say to me, oh, what did you do at university? Well, I didn't go to university. It was, but I have a wealth of experience, and don't take that generosity and throw it back in my face. And I think that's really, really important. So the work that you do with the Inspiring Women Changemakers, it's a community, and you've got...
it's in 3 parts. My work is in 3 parts, essentially. So it's a membership community of changemakers of all genders, mostly women, and non-binary people. The mission is to advance fairness and safety for women at work, at home and in society, and that links to the unfairness I'm talking about, because whether it's for people like us who are self-employed, we know that investment in women-owned businesses is far less, and even less still when it comes to race or disability. There are multiple research reports on that, and not just in the UK, but I've participated in some European studies as well that have looked into this. So not being invested in, looking at unsuitable sources of finance for those who want to grow, the wrong selection of business partners, or all these other things.
We've all been there.
We've all been there, me too. So it's a really powerful community of people who genuinely want to support each other. So that generosity you've talked about, we don't have tossers because the culture of generosity is set. And I've got some rules before people even sign up. There are some ground rules about all of that and confidentiality and so on. And people, I do think tossers deselect themselves after a time as well. If they can't claim the energy that they're seeking with that behaviour, they soon leave and move on somewhere else anyway. So you just leave them to it. But the other part of what I do, so the main income generating part of my business is I'm a trainer and consultant around inclusive communication and good governance, and then the other part is I'm a professional speaker on all of the subjects that I've described. So it's a good blend because all of it weaves into each other, and I think finally, touch wood, I feel like I'm in a place where I've got you talk about work balance, it's life balance, isn't it? Pre-COVID, I broke my ankle, so I was already doing quite a bit online, and now almost 98% of my work is online, and I'm happy with that because I love my home, I love my garden, I love gardening, and when I do decide to travel, it's for things like this or for client sites with clients that I genuinely like and want to work with them. So, I feel really content have done for the last few years, and fingers crossed, I think as business owners, we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
We are. And I think that work-life blend is so important, and I think it helps us to then understand better how we can live that content life without those tossers in it that we don't need to be working with.
But it's also about allies that stand up for us as well. They don't have to be visible, silently as well. I've got 1 or 2 clients that aren't overprotective, but they know my thoughts on all of the things that we've been discussing. And so I'm not even necessarily put forward to an end client that wouldn't give me the conditions of cultural or psychological safety that I look for.
And that's important. Anj, thank you.
Thank
you so much for being my guest today on Don't Work With Tossers, the podcast. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Anj, hook up and find out more about what she does, you will find her on LinkedIn, Anj Handa.
Thank you so much, Tina.